How old do you think we all are?
49 years old.
Pretty close.
37 years old.
Spiritually, yeah.
And you're 19.
Thank you. See? No idea how old we are.
Yeah. 63.
Oh, why?
Hey, what's going on, guys? You're watching the Modding Corner, and with the recent announcement of Xenoverse 3, I mean Age 1000, the topic of age in Dragon Ball has been fascinating to me. You see, age in Dragon Ball is basically the equivalent to what years are for us. For example, the Xenoverse series takes place across ages 850 and 852 according to the intros of the game. Now, we travel across the ages to the different time periods of Z, GT, and Super, but all current events happen in either age 852 or higher. So one day I started thinking, damn! This game turns 10 years old, and the new game is called Age 1000, so it made me think, damn, how old is the Xenoverse cast? And the more I thought about it, the more I realized some of y'all are too damn old, and some of you are too damn young. So today, I'm gonna be guessing how old the characters in the Xenoverse series are, as well as what time period they come from prior to their introduction to Xenoverse. But before we get started, feel free to like and subscribe, because I'm trying to hit 50K by the end of 2026, so your support will go a very long way, and with all that being said, let's get started. Now, there's no better place to start than with the original Xenoverse 1 protagonist, Ace. Since he was the Xenoverse 1 focus CAC, we actually get to see where he comes from. So Ace, according to Trunks, was chosen by Shenron. Now, at first I wasn't really sure if Shenron created Ace or if Ace was summoned to Toki Toki. So I did some research and I'm mostly still unsure. On one hand, he must have been created by Shenron, since in Xenoverse he's basically immune to Demigra's time erasure. While in Xenoverse 2, since his events become a part of the book of the beginning and end, when Towa goes back in time to kill Shenron, this erases the Xenoverse 1 protagonist from history, implying that he was created by Shenron. On the other hand, he could have just been summoned by Shenron from an alternate timeline. When you start Xenoverse 1, Shenron says you've been summoned from a land far away, whatever that means. Now, I've seen some speculation that the Xenoverse 1 hero could actually be the same person as the hero from Ultimate Tenkaichi, which does take place in the alternate timeline that went to chaos thanks to Omega Shenron in the Black Star Dragon Ball. So maybe this is Shenron's way of sort of redeeming his soul? Regardless, you could go two different ways with this. If you think he was summoned by Shenron from the UT timeline and factor in the Xenoverse games, he's somewhere around 20 to 21 years old, going off the body types in Xenoverse 1, looking like a tall and lanky build, as if he was fully grown. That combined with the 2-year time skip makes me think that's how old he is. Now, if you want to go with the idea that Shenron created the Xenoverse 1 CAC, that would mean bro is 2 years old. Okay, one of you are going to jail. What do you mean he's only 2 years old? Do you see what he's been put through? Anyway, let's move on to Xeno Trunks, aka the guy I slander at least twice a month. This version of Trunks is one that has experienced the events of the History of Trunks special, as well as the events of the Android and Cell saga. He was able to go back to his future and stop the androids and Cell, as we actually do get to see his history in Xenoverse 1 and 2. Now, the main question with this Trunks variant is, when exactly is his cutoff point? As we know, he gets enlisted to the Time Patrol before he could experience his version of the Goku Black Arc. A potential cutoff point for him is his encounter with Dabura and Babidi, since in the Dragon Ball Super manga, we see Trunks train with Shin and Kibito to stop the revival of Buu. This story was actually adapted into Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, which, thanks to Towa and Mira's involvement, we now know acts as the main version of the Z timeline for Xenoverse 2. So you can't just say, oh, he was taken after his Dabura and Babidi encounter in age 795, right? Well, actually, there's a pretty big Super Saiyan 2 elephant in the room. Xenoverse Trunks at no point uses Super Saiyan 2, a form that he obtained in his fight with Dabura. The Trunks we see only has Super Saiyan 1, which means we can't take him from his fight with Dabura, even though in the alternate future with Trunks, he knows that they have to do something about Buu in that timeline, which means he does know about Buu appearing yet didn't finish his training? Oh my god, you bum! I don't even know who to blame, Trunks for not finishing his training or Chronoa for taking such a weak Trunks variant. What's even worse is that we still don't know how long he's been a Time Patroller for, since apparently he is the leader of the group, in a matter of speaking, I guess. Still, in most media, the Time Patrol was established before Trunks showed up, but we can assume he's a very important member. So for his timeline, I think it's safe to say he was taken after his fight with Cell in age 788. And let's just say he spent a few months with the Time Patrol prior to into Xenoverse 1, since he doesn't know about Towa, Mira, and Demigra before the events of Xenoverse 1. Then we can count the 2-year time skip, thus making him around 25 years old at the time of Xenoverse 2. So yeah, hopefully that can explain some of the inconsistencies of him a bit, as it would make sense for Trunks to keep some of his naive air about him, like how he was before his Goku Black appeared. You know whose inconsistencies can't be explained with age? Now, Dragon Ball gods are super old, like Shin, Kibito, Beerus, and Whis, who are tens of millions of years old. But since Elder Kai states that the age gap between them is around a millennium, all we have to do is find out how old Elder Kai is and subtract that by 1,000. So just how old is the Elder Kai? So you're telling me not only was Elder Kai sealed off about 75 million years ago, but was possibly alive a good few million years before that, thus making the Supreme Kai time at least 75 million years old? No, as a matter of fact, we know that she's at least 75 million years old because she seals away Demigra in the crack of time 75 million years ago too. Also, let's just lowball it and say that Elder Kai was maybe 5 million years old like Shin when he got sealed. That's still ridiculous because how are you 80 million years old and still look like a preschooler? And not only that, you actually have the personality of one. Anyway, to get back on track, the Supreme Kai of Time and Elder Kai are likely from this era, so they are roughly 80 million years old with a 1,000 year difference. So now that we figured that out, let's finally move on to RCAC and alright, the bird. Now, Toki Toki is a real chicken and the egg situation because we have gods that are older than time, assuming we count ages when they started tracking this stuff. And we don't know where he comes from. Now, like Chronoa, we already know he's at least 75 million years old since he was raised by her. But Chronoa likely raised him from birth, so I'd give him a little slack and say he's somewhere around 75 to 76 million years old. Now on to the Xenoverse 2 protagonist, which unlike the Xenoverse 1 protagonist, we know for a fact he comes from the current era which the series is set in, as he was chosen as the warrior of the Elder Kai, which I feel like we don't talk enough about how Shenron's choice for champion gets dunked on by Elder Kai. Now there's actually not much evidence to know what the Xenoverse 2 CAC really did before becoming a time patroller, but two sources I want to look at is the Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2 prequel manga, as well as the little time patroller logs that the DB Games Twitter is doing right now. So their story actually begins
Attention,
with,
all
not
crowd
that one.
warriors.
No, they actually decide to join the time patrol at some point during age 851, as they joined before the creation of Conton City, which happened in age 851. In the prequel manga, we see them fall into one of the time rifts that destroyed Toki Toki City, and that's where they first interact with Goku in the Xenoverse 1 CAC. Now we can make a couple of assumptions, as we know that at the start of the game, the Xenoverse 2 CAC is still new at time traveling. However, they likely spent time training at the Patroller Academy where they met Elder Kai at, as well as looking into their race exclusive time rift that we see them look at the start of the game. So going off what we know about the pre-gap era of Xenoverse 1 and 2, as well as him attending Orange Star Academy to help train his powers, I'd have to assume that the CAC is around a college graduate age, especially since they don't actively attend the academy later in the story, and you're able to get yourself a flying license. So with all that, I have to believe that the Xenoverse 2 protagonist is around 22 years old. Now I believe that because if he joined the academy at 18 for college, he would have been in Toki Toki hearing about the time patrol for the first time, which basically would have led him out of school into landing a career thanks to his teacher Elder Kai. Now on to the villains, and I think it makes the most sense to start by order of appearance. Now, Towa is interesting because we have no official confirmation as to how old she really is, but we do know that she is Dabura's little sister, which already implies she's younger than him. Dabura, who we'll briefly talk about later, has been around for at least 1,000 years, and we know that thanks to Dragon Ball Daima, every 10 demon years is like 1 human year for them. But we also don't know if she potentially stole any years from anybody to keep her looks. What we do know is that she lives to see age ? Or at least what I like to call age 852 with extra steps. Quick pivot, but I actually think age ? is still age 852, as when you finish the story you can buy Towa a bikini. Walk with me here. Now, in order to give her this bikini, you have to give it to Goku, who instant transmissions to Earth's hell to give it to her. Which, if she died in the future, why would she be sent to a present day hell? Therefore, I think age ? is actually Earth in age 852. Why does it look like this? Well, that could be a video for another day. So between her age and design, my guess is that she's between 1,000 and 2,000 years old, as she was likely born before the events of the series, but can also live long enough to make it to age 852, with her death also being in age 852. Speaking of, let's talk about her right-hand man and maybe lover slash donor, Mira. Now, Mira is actually an interesting case because he's less of a pure demon and more of a bio-android since he was created by Towa. Now, Mira's DNA is made up of various Saiyans, Freezes, and Namekians we see throughout the series. So I think it's pretty safe to say he was definitely created post-End of Z and GT, but before age 850, since Xenoverse 1 established Towa and Mira as a threat they consistently go against. And Xenoverse 1 Mira appeared to be around the same level as a Buu Saga Goku at the very least. I think we could also slide Mira's creation in around age 800 to age 850, thus making him at most 50 years old or 5 years old in demon years. Maybe Towa deserved to be swallowed. The next main villain is Demigra, the antagonist of Xenoverse 1. Now he's gonna be a pretty easy one as well, since we know that he and Supreme Kai at time had history. Way back when Chronoa was just an average Kai, she and Demigra helped raise Toki Toki until he betrayed her, so she trapped and betrayed him in the Time Rift, where he lied dormant for 75 million years. So since he and the Supreme Kai at time had history together, I'm gonna assume that they're also roughly the same age, so I'll slot him in with Chronoa and Elder Kai as oldest. Now, our next character is Masked Saiyan, which this one is pretty hard because he has that mask on, so it's hard to tell who he really is. And wait, Bardock?
Yeah, let me get 2 quick pics in the...
Darnell, that's you? Boy, look at you, boy, looking like 1968.
Luckily for us, we know that Bardock was taken exactly from the moment he was supposed to die in the Father of Goku timeline, which means all we have to do is find out what year he was born, and it's not out there. I thought this was gonna be another easy one. Okay, let's talk about Saiyan lifespans. Now, a Saiyan typically lives around 20 to 40 years since they are constantly fighting. There aren't many examples of Saiyans living to old age. However, the main exception to the rule is PSN, as he's a Saiyan who was from Bardock's era, and thanks to some old information, we know that Saiyans drastically age around the age of 80, which means PSN was likely around 40 to 50 years old when he was exiled to Vampa. Bardock also seems to have been a very experienced warrior, so experienced that even though he was considered a low-class warrior, his son Raditz was actually able to fight alongside Vegeta at a young age. So that means he must have done something right with teaching him how to fight. And seeing that Raditz and Vegeta are around the same age, that being 5 when Planet Vegeta is destroyed, I think it's safe to say that Bardock is probably pushing 30. So factoring in the years he spent as the Masked Saiyan, he's likely around 30 to 35 years old by the time of Xenoverse 2. And he was pulled from age 737. Now let's get back to Dabura. We know exactly what time period he was taken from, as his soul was collected by Towa before his death at the hands of Majin Buu. However, since then, he's been mostly working in the shadows while Towa and Mira do their thing. So like his sister, we can place him to be around a couple thousand years old, but since he's older, I'm confident in saying that he's probably around 2,000 to 3,000 years old, as he's taken from age 774. Now the last character I will cover here today is the literal future boy himself, Fu. Now, Fu is extremely hard to track, as he isn't mentioned nor shows up until the Infinite History DLC. And thanks to Dragon Ball Online, we do know that Fu was a baby, which means he likely grew up around either Towa or Dabura, keeping a watchful eye on his growth. Which, considering how he turned out, doesn't seem to be all that bad. Fu always had a childlike sense of wonder to him, and it's that same charisma that lets him get off scot-free for as long as he does. Which is why the Time Patrol doesn't necessarily see him as a villain like his parents, but more of an annoying kid down the street who doesn't know when to shut up. Now, I can't really pinpoint which age he comes from, but you can look at it one of 2 ways. If you believe he ages the same as regular mortals, he's probably a fresh 18 years old, seeing as he was very hidden before and is very knowledgeable about the main timeline. If you want to go by demon years, on the other hand, he could be up to 1 year old if you go off the diamond age difference. Again, none of these ages are set in stone. I could definitely be way off with some of these, so feel free to discuss in the comments what ages and timelines you think these characters are from. And if this video does well, maybe I'll do one on the mentors and NPCs in Conton. So in conclusion, Chronoa and Towa endorse child labor. Who's the real bad guy here?